What's in the Box? Episodes of Horror with Donna and Eric. I'm Donna,
And I'm Eric.
and we're kind of doing something a little different. Not really different. We're doing a Christmas read, um, which we chose The Festival by H.P. Lovecraft, which isn't necessarily a Christmas story, but it does take place at Christmas. Um,
I mean, it opens with that. That kind of tells
yeah,
us that it is. I mean, we did Christmas Carol last year, so
yeah,
I think, and now we've got a Halloween theme. We'll, kind of hit all the two main holidays, I guess. So,
yeah, yeah. So, um, I've never read Lovecraft before this experience. We picked four stories because they are short. If we tried to do one episode on one story, we really wouldn't have much to talk about. So we picked four. We picked The Festival, Color Out of Space, Herbert West Reanimator, and The Call of Cthulhu because you can't really read Lovecraft without Cthulhu, right?
right.
Um, Now I do have to say that I probably strayed away from Lovecraft because I always thought that cosmic horror you had to be super intelligent to read and understand. It just seemed like something that I don't know. I just didn't feel smart enough to read cosmic horror. I have read cosmic horror before, but not Lovecraft. Um, and while I enjoyed the ones that I have read, again, I felt that I wasn't smart enough to actually get it. But after reading actual Lovecraft, I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's because it comes across as pretentious. It's one of the people that do celebrate Lovecraft. They kind of try and make it sound like it's something otherworldly and more special than maybe it is. I mean, and it is really special because it's such an incredible idea,
Yeah.
but it's so universal in a lot of our stories and our fairy tales and our religions and all that stuff. You can kind of see a reflection of it when you look at the stories that he wrote. And
Mm,
and I enjoyed this pass that we just did, but I've read him before, and there are times where I didn't enjoy reading it because I don't know if he's a good writer. But this last time, I enjoyed these four stories, and maybe it was just the mood I was in. But I felt like um, they all they all hit the right tone, the right note this time, and I
yeah.
enjoyed all four of the stories. I have never heard of or read the festival before, so that was cool. That was the one we picked for our holiday thing. The other three, I'd read two of them. Oddly enough, the Call of Cthulhu was the one I hadn't read. So, but I enjoyed all four of them. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, especially because it feels like you need to know like science and
Yes. Yeah.
astronomy and all the other things. But really, when you get into it, you kind of notice that he's made up most of it. He's
Yeah.
borrowed it from something else that we are familiar with, and he's added his own really cool spin to it. I think the fun thing about Lovecraft is that most of his stuff, I think, is in that weird zone where it's no longer copyright protected.
Hmm.
So you'll see some of his characters or his ideas pop up in other things.
Yeah.
We see um, the wizards, and we didn't actually read any of the stories with the wizards in them this time, but the wizards that celebrate the dark gods and the old gods and all that stuff, he'll pop up in Conan, or he'll pop up in some of the Marvel comics. um, there are people that lean into a lot of these characters and these monsters and stuff, and they use them in their own stuff because it's not copyright. And we've seen it in different mediums, games, and D&D
Yeah.
uses a lot of it if you're into that kind of stuff. So I think it's impossible to get away from, which is kind of cool because I think I could see this if it was niche. It's niche enough that I could see if it wasn't something that everybody that does love it was unable to share it in different
Yeah.
mediums, this could be something that only a handful of us would know anything about.
Right.
But it seems like everybody knows what Cthulhu and all that stuff is. So then I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like it's funny because everybody, whether they've read Lovecraft or not, everybody knows who Cthulhu is. Like everybody.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
that's really cool.
yeah, and I
And
was
what I also think is really cool about H.P. Lovecraft, and I want to say, some of his contemporary writers did the same thing. Howard did with with a lot of his histories throughout his books, his sword and sorcerer stuff, they kind of tied together. You would see characters that would jump back and forth, maybe historically or whatever, but he would build on the mythos. So Lovecraft builds on his mythos, and you will find stories that tie together or have nods to each other, so that as you read more and more Lovecraft, you start to see how all of it is tied together in
yeah,
whatever he was trying to come up with.
yeah, I thought that um and we'll talk about it when we actually talk about the stories, but I thought the festival had somebody from Herbert West the Reanimator in it, but then I realized that the festival was written first. Oh no. Yeah, the festival was written first and then Reanimator was written like at a later date. So I was like, oh, maybe. Oh no, sorry, I got that mixed up. They were written after each other. It was written after Herbert West. So it could have been. We'll discuss that when we talk about it, and see if you had the same thoughts as I did.
Yeah, I'll have to see. I've got some notes, so I've got some right next to the screen here. So if I'm looking off, I'm reading that to see what interesting thing might pop up. The
Yeah.
first thing I have on the festival is it is the first mythos story to use witch haunted Kingsport as a setting.
Hmm.
And so as we read more and more Lovecraft, I think we're going to find more and more of this setting, this town, and the discussion about the witches and stuff that may or may not have been in there.
Yeah. So the whole, I guess, premise of this story is there's a man who's been called home, he just says by his forefathers, to celebrate the festival, and it happens to take place at Christmas. Which a line struck me funny in that it said the humans called it Christmas. So does that mean that the narrator is not human? Or is that what we're supposed to believe?
Um, well, we do know that the narrator, when he wakes up in the hospital, he's reading the was it Necronomica?
Necronomicon. Yeah.
And that's the other thing that's interesting about this story. This is the first story where they have actual quoted text from that
Hmm.
shared. So that kind of opens the mythos there too. But he is talking about, um, the other beings, the dark beings, the creatures that were worshipped before Christmas was around. Um, so yeah, maybe he's talking about that is what he's
Yeah.
discussing. I think he himself is human, the narrator. I mean, even though he is trying to show us that his family line has been a part of this celebration or this festival thing
Yeah.
for centuries. As we're trying to give him there, there's the one of the guys that's trying to sell him on joining the festival shows him his great grandfather's watch, which I thought was a bit weird because I mean,
Yeah.
how would he know that that watch was buried with the great grandfather? You know what I mean? How would
Yeah.
he even know
Yeah.
what the watch is? There wouldn't be pictures or anything because it would
Yeah.
send it so far back into time. So I thought that was a weird point that he made, but overall, yeah, I think it was just a really cool way for Lovecraft to kind of reinforce some of the ideas he was putting out there for with the not just the Cthulhu but all of the old gods
Hmm.
and the other dimension that that we as humans might have been able to access before. Because when he's writing it in the 20s, I mean, we still will think of him as backwards and I mean, they're isolated. They don't have any other way to communicate and stuff like that, which is, I think, a lot of people use as the reason for his, um, racism and nationalism in a way where, he was very anti-immigrant. But I think it was mostly because it was such a different time. It was a different,
Yeah.
not just a different time, but the fact that it was such a he lived in a little tiny town in Rhode Island. And so
Yeah.
I think when you get people coming in that are strangers, it wouldn't matter in that day and age. Strangers are strangers.
Yeah.
And the more exotic the stranger, the more they're going to have different thoughts on them showing up. I
Yeah.
think later in life, he does actually start branching out and traveling, going to New York City, starts seeing people other than what he's used to seeing. And he,
Yeah.
he does become a little more nuanced in the whole idea of, immigration and all that stuff. So,
Yeah. And people turn out the way their environment
oh,
is,
for sure. I,
you
I, I know a
know?
lot of people try and act like an environment has no bearing on that kind of thought and stuff. But yeah, of course it does. I mean,
And
you
especially
get,
back then, because there was no social media, there was no having friends across the ocean, that you could talk to on a daily basis. There
yeah,
was no experiencing different cultures on a regular basis,
there's no TV, no movies, not really, whatever there is, it's silent films if they had that, and even that's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, so I mean, not to get it off on that. And that's one thing I hate about Lovecraft. When you mention him, you always have some person who wants to stand up and compare him to today's ideologies and stuff and act like he's a bad person because he doesn't line up with how people think today, which is the stupidest thing. It'd be like,
Yeah.
getting mad at cowboys or any of that stuff because they're not 100% in lockstep with the way people think today. It's always such a bad argument because when you go and look at it, though, he is a brilliant idea, man. And the
Hmm.
fact that he comes up with these things back then without any of this influence, I think that's an amazing thing. He has no outside influence really to give us this amazing.
Genre. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, the cosmic
eh,
horror, the
yeah.
interdimensional horror. He's got creatures that I mean, you can when you read about him, you can see he's influenced by other books and maybe he's read some stuff and he's pulling ideas from other civilizations and stuff, but you can tell a lot of it is coming out of his own mind and stuff, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The festival itself, I thought it was a fun read for what it was. It doesn't really go into too much, but it does give us a few nuggets that would, if you're on the path to learn more about the overall mythos he's trying to do, it is one of those chapters that you definitely should have in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I found it like really creepy. The part that creeped me out the most, I should say, is when he gets to the house and it's the old guy with like he describes it as almost like a wax face.
Hmm.
And he doesn't talk and he just like sits him down and gives him the Necronomicon to read. And then there's the old lady spinning um, using the yarn. I don't know what that's
Yeah.
called. And then when it's like they just leave him there for hours, and then when it's time to go, just brings him down. I thought that was the creepiest part. And that's the person I was thinking was from the Herbert West story, was the guy with the wax face.
Right, right, because he does use that for the other thing,
Yeah.
which we'll definitely get into that because that's an interesting. I don't know. I can't imagine it is, but I think it was the way that people back there disguised ailments or issues.
Disfigurements, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
nothing I saw when I was looking around tied the two together, but you could easily see that that's a common theme he's got there, and that's another thing he does really well is the creepy.
Yeah.
He does creepy really well. And he's, I mean, I guess most people would say he's well known or he's one of his skills is to write a descent into madness. Many of his characters start off sane, and by the end of the story, they are insane or have some sort of issue, which in the way, the festivals that is like that,
Yeah.
because he does end up in a hospital, which I thought was weird though. Isn't that they give him, is that when they give him the book or is that the second time he gets the book?
It's the second time he gets the book.
Right. So
Yeah.
somehow he's got another copy of this book that's really difficult to get a hold of. So
Yeah.
I did think that was a little off, but because of that, we are given another section of the book that at up to that point, I don't think anybody had. So
Yeah. But I liked it. I mean, I read this was the last one I read out of the four stories. So I just read them back to back because they're short, so
yeah.
um,
Well, this one I read and then I didn't, you know, I don't think I kept any of it in my head. So then I watched a YouTube video where they're reading it again. And that time I think it kept a little bit better. It kept my attention that time. So um
yeah, that's good. Yeah, it was interesting for you to when you messaged me and said that they were all on YouTube, you could listen to them all on YouTube.
yeah, I think all of them are outside that zone of the copyright. So
Public
people can read
domain.
them and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, they're on the public domain. So
Yeah.
um I have a friend that has read a few of them. I know she's on there, and but I found, like it was really cool. When I did Herbert West, I listened to two of the six stories with the guy from the movie reading it,
Oh, wow.
and then the other ones I read. And then I listened to the Call of Cthulhu. I did listen to that on YouTube as just a reading, and I read the Color Out of Night. So it's a fun thing that you can do all these different ways to absorb his storytelling. And I have to say, I didn't find any of them this time to be one better than the other.
Yeah.
Sometimes you really can tell, hey, you need to read it or you need to hear it. Um,
Hmm.
I found both ways to be pretty well done.
Yeah. So the next one we have here is The Color Out of Space. Um, and this one, I don't know why, but as I'm reading it and as the story progresses, it reminded me of the segment with Stephen King from Creepshow when he's
Oh yeah,
Geordie,
yeah,
even though it's not really the same storyline, but it's a meteorite falls and then it like
hmm
overtakes the farm. That's all I could picture in my head
yeah,
is,
and I could definitely see that, and I'm sure that did influence the story because I mean, and like I've said, we were discussing it. This is one of those stories that they've tried to make into a movie numerous times and have failed, and a lot of people didn't think it could be made into a movie. Um, and I think we're going to do a project where we watch a handful of these and see which one did it the best. But I could easily see King and Romero putting that together and saying, "Hey, why don't we let this influence the story?"
yeah.
In a way, it's the same, but it's also a little different.
Mm,
Because in that one, it's just singularly the one lonely guy and his whole thing turning into this overgrown moss or whatever it
Moss,
was,
yeah.
and then him having to end it. This is more of a story of an entire section becoming um,
Just like
corrupted by an outside
corrupted,
force.
yeah.
And the funny thing is I can't pull my notes up the way we have this thing going, which is okay because I think I have most of it, in my head, but he wanted Lovecraft wanted he was upset because every time he would read somebody's version of an alien, it was always a humanoid. It was always some sort of alien that was kind of easily imagined and was even familiar.
Hmm.
And so he wanted to write a story where the alien was so alien that it stood out, like it was something that you couldn't even describe. It was so insane. And so
Yeah.
that's where you get this idea of they keep going back to it, how it's all these colors that they can't even explain it, or when something goes wrong, they have difficulty explaining what's going on because the alien itself was so fantastic and so
Yeah.
different that the people of that time wouldn't have any idea how to explain what was going on, except for in a way that would come across as almost supernatural or, superstitious.
Yeah.
And so you have the giant meteor. Oh, what's the other thing is that it's not taking place in real time. We have the guy from Boston who's a surveyor who goes up there and they tell him about this area the in the hills west of Arkham, which is Arkham's one of the main cities in Lovecraft stories. A
Yep.
lot of things take place in Arkham, or there's reference to Arkham. So this is out in the hills. There, a meteor crashed, and after this is, it feels like 50 years later, 30 years
Yeah,
later, something like
yeah.
that.
Yep.
He goes to see what happened, and there's only one person left that knows what happened,
Knows the story.
and everybody calls him a crazy old man. So you don't even know if you're getting a reliable story because everybody else is telling you that the guy telling you the story, or is who's telling the narrator the story, is an
Is
unreliable,
yeah,
source, which is kind of interesting in its way because that guy is, he's steadfast in what he believes he saw, and in a way you'd have to think that everything is too fantastic for him to make up some,
right.
kind of guy out in the hills.
Yeah.
um
I love the progression, the meteor
mhm,
hits, um, and then they start seeing all the colors and the fruit starts growing really big. But then it starts going downhill. The fruit
yeah,
is not edible and the animals start to turn gray and die, and then
and they're
the color
misshapen and they're
they're mis
larger, and
yeah,
they have something weird about them. All their tracks
yeah,
are strange. So
yep. And then the family starts going insane. It starts with the mother and um Ami, who is the person telling the story, who was their neighbor, told them, "Oh, the water is rotten. Don't drink the water," because of course the meteor crashed into the well. Um, and they're like, "Oh, well, we're going to drink it." And so basically, you think that the water is infecting them. Um, yeah, it's a really sad story because the whole family ends up, at the end going insane and dying. And um, I don't
and
know.
they're misshapen and misformed, and
Yeah, yeah, and I wouldn't have want to be because at the end, when Ami goes to the town and brings the people back, the police back. Um, they have someone goes down in the well, right?
mhm,
And I'm
they
like,
start.
I
Yeah, I
would
would
not want to be, no, no,
seal it
thank
up
you.
and let it
Yep.
be done. But they, of course, they got to pull out the bodies, and they find two of the kids, and
Yeah, the two boys. Yeah.
they find what, a dog and a couple other animals that had fallen in the well, and they're all they're grotesquely
Yeah.
deformed, and you can tell that whatever was in that meteorite is the alien life form that has landed has taken over this area and basically not only changed everything, but then in the end destroyed everything. Because
Yep.
when they're done with it, everything is dead.
Yeah. And
And
there's
then
all,
and
yeah, it's just a big, when the surveyor gets there, 50 years later or so, it's just a gray area with, I think it said that there was only some stones from the chimney left.
yeah, I think
Um,
so.
but he also said that little by little, the grayness is creeping out, the like
Right.
border, it creeps
And
out a little bit.
this
So,
is our alien invasion, and where we might expect an alien invasion to be something that um, was quick and took over as much as it could. This is going to be one of those where maybe this is how life is formed, through this specific organism as it invades. It's a slow process, but it will eventually take over everything, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so that's even scarier, because there's no way that these people can stop this creeping terror as it moves forward.
yeah, creeping terror is a good way to describe it. And yeah, I think the story takes place over like 2 years because they
Yeah.
mentioned like last harvest and things like that. So it's like it doesn't happen quick. It's not like an overnight thing. It's a creeping takeover, you know?
And I think that's why it was so difficult, um, for them to make this into a movie, because of the time that elapses in the story isn't something that usually translates well to film, which is why I think the newest version, and we'll talk about it when we see it, it does a better job of it because they do actually hurry everything up. everything happens much quicker than it does in the story. But I think the story's impact when you're reading it, it really hits you hard as you're seeing how long it's taking for all this to happen and how it's, affecting everything over this period of time. So it
Yeah.
works really well for the story. If I remember correctly, this is Lovecraft's favorite story that he wrote. This is like, sometimes he's like, I don't like what I just did, but I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
This one
No,
here's fun.
I can see that because I think this one had to have been my favorite out of the four, and then followed by Reanimator. Um,
Yeah, I do too. I mean, like I said, I had difficulty the first time focusing on the festival, but when I finished it, when I was done with it and sitting down and writing the notes and thinking about it, I did enjoy the festival for what it was.
yeah.
But you can tell there's something special about this, and
Hmm.
and maybe you can see a maturity. I don't know, off the top of my head, I don't know in the list of when he wrote this, but I think it was later. And he's better.
Yeah.
He's obviously getting better as he writes. That's the hope you would get with every writer, is that as they continue their journey in writing, they get better as they go along.
Yeah.
And I
So this one
definitely
was
feel like he's a good storyteller here.
yeah, this one was written in 1927. Call of Cthulhu was written in 26. The festival was written in 23,
Was
and
Herbert West
Herbert.
wasn't 21? No, or was it later?
Um, Let me see
God, I almost
what.
want to say it was 25, but that doesn't make.
Let's see. I must have passed it here. 1920. In the date it says October 21 through June 22.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so 21, 22. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you could see some growth there.
Yeah.
But you go back and read some of his really early stuff, um, and there's definitely some growth. Um,
Yeah. My plan is to actually start with The Alchemist. That was his first in 1908, and work my way down because I am very excited about H.P. Lovecraft now.
oh, very cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's the best part, though, right? The whole reason we do this is the hope that we would, you know, kind of open some of these doors and rediscover some stuff that we maybe read when we a long time ago, but find new things that we've never experienced and enjoy those. So,
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I didn't like about The Color Out of Space, but I totally get it, is the whole undescribable thing. I'm like, just describe it to me. I want to know what you're talking
well,
about.
again, right? And like I
But
said, that's what he wanted. He didn't
yeah,
want it to be something that we could um, put into
imagine.
words.
Yeah,
So.
put into words. But it didn't take away from, my enjoyment at all.
And then again, we're thinking of it as today, reading
Hmm.
it today. Imagine reading that in the 20s and you're like, you could easily come up with some just hideous thing.
Yeah.
Um, in our minds, I think because of TV and the movies and stuff, we have an idea of what some of these things are supposed to look like. So I think it's an amazing. He does have a good way of kind of pulling you into those um,
Yeah.
monster descriptions and stuff, and letting you kind of come up with how it looks. He'll give you parts of it, and then you kind of have to mash it together
Yeah.
in his description. But we don't have to because we've seen 1,000 pictures of what these things are supposed to look like. So
Yeah. Yeah. Herbert West Reanimator. This one was a fun one.
this one is really funny because it was published by it was an amateur publication by one of his friends, and he was given a to-do list and he hated it. And so I don't know how much he actually enjoyed the whole thing. There's a quote saying something like, "Well, I got paid $5 a story, so that's why I did it." And so um, when you look at it that way, it's funny to see, would he have done this if he hadn't been paid by his friend to do this. But the thing
Yeah.
he didn't like, and you'll see it if you read these, there's 6 stories. Each one was released in the serial, but
Hmm.
they all have recaps. So by
I
the
was
time
going
you
to
get to the
mention that.
sixth one, you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I know. We've been reading this stupid thing all back to back to back.
Yes,
I get
I
it,
know
but
he's got blue eyes, blonde hair, and wears glasses, and he's
so
small, and you're his assistant. Yes, I know. Yes, I know.
that's why he hated it though. He was told to recap and he was told to leave them on cliffhangers. And so they have kind of a cliffhanger ending every time, and they all have the recap, which eats up a lot of space, which gets a little, repetitious and annoying. But it's such a great character and such a fun idea. And he's also making fun of, well, it's a parody of Frankenstein. And I don't know
Yeah,
if it's a parody of Frankenstein because he didn't like Frankenstein or if he was doing more of an homage to Frankenstein. It's
yeah,
hard to tell because he doesn't really feel, it doesn't feel like he's taking the science as serious as Shelley did.
yeah,
Which when we went over that, it felt like a science fiction
yeah,
novel. It was telling us, they really were trying to show us, oh, this is how you would do it. Because in his mind, it's just goo that you inject in a dead body and it'll come alive again, which really seems to be a disservice to all of the other steps that they told us Frankenstein you
yeah,
needed to have this, reanimation.
yeah.
But it's impossible to read this without imagining the characters from Reanimator,
Mm,
I think. And so that's also fun, in a way. But the Reanimator set in the 80s versus this one set in, forever ago. That is kind of a conflict when you're smashing up against it. But
yeah,
I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the stories. I liked all six of the stories, and I liked how they all tied together. So
yeah. So I started reading it, and I'm like, oh, this is like a Frankenstein. But then he just kept going, and I'm like, okay, because in Frankenstein there's one monster,
yeah, and I think
potentially
that's
a second because he wants a bride, but
is
but
that
this
the
guy,
parody?
I don't know, but this guy just kept going, like,
Right. Well, I mean, is that the parody though? Is that you shouldn't be able to have success that quickly?
yeah,
This guy's fail every story is basically failing.
yeah,
Um, and then at the end, even when I guess at the end he does achieve success, but it's in such a horrific manner that it isn't the kind of monster that can go off and learn French and become,
play
almost a
chess.
gentleman and do all that stuff that we get from the Frankenstein story. It's a guy that's got his head in a box and a wax
Yeah,
mask and a fake
yeah, and
head on top and stuff.
that's the one that I thought was in the um,
It very well could have been, but I haven't seen anything that referenced it, and he didn't do anything
yeah,
other than give us the wax mask. But
yeah,
even though the story was published later, I think it takes place earlier
yeah,
than Herbert West. It definitely takes place before World War One. The festival did. So it
yeah,
can't be the same guy, but it's the same idea.
yeah.
Probably the guy was so old. Wasn't the guy so old? That's why he had the wax mask on the
He
festival.
just said he was wearing a wax mask and he was really old, so that's what made me think, okay, maybe it was this guy, and that took place before this, and now he's like super old and he's got this wax. But I would
Yeah,
think maybe he'd be carrying his head around with him.
you would think, yeah,
Yeah,
so that he could, you know,
yeah,
communicate when possible. So we get six stories. The first story is real basic. They're experimenting on the body, and they discover that it needs to be fresher. And so then the person that they reanimate, trying to think of the first one. I think he just goes back to the grave. Like he just runs away or something.
yeah, because they're in the house in the field,
Yeah.
and they end up just running away
Yeah.
and leaving this creature. So they're like, well, we don't know what happened to that guy, so hope it's okay.
And then the second one is the one where they accidentally where they isn't two the one where they actually change the dean of medicine into it?
Yeah,
Yeah. So they're told to quit messing with dead bodies. They're not given access to dead bodies, but typhoid is hitting the town, so they're able to experiment on these dead bodies because there's so many of them. And then the dean of medicine, who was kind of West's, they say
nemesis.
rival in some things, but he's not a rival. He's like his nemesis in a way.
His nemesis, yeah.
He's stopping him at every point. You cannot do this,
Yeah.
which is funny because, of course, today we're like, yeah, you can't mess with dead bodies. But in the old days, when you're looking at the 1800s and the early 1900s, you got to be thinking, well, medicine hasn't advanced, and people were still in that weird superstitious thing where you can't mess with a body. Well, if you don't mess with the body, then you don't learn the secrets and you can't figure out how to fix it. And then you don't
Yeah.
have any advancements in medicine. And so you kind of understand why they were doing these crazy things and dissecting corpses and all that stuff and the secret so they could become, the medicine could advance. But at the same time, you kind of get was, people would think you're crazy if you're doing it. So, but in that one, the dean finally himself dies, and they're thinking fresh body. They inject him, and he becomes enraged and beats them unconscious, and then escapes from the boarding house and goes on a killing rampage. And then they call him a cannibal killer. Then they finally capture him. They put him away in jail.
Yeah, he kills like 14 people
Yeah, I mean
and
that's crazy too.
he ends up in an asylum and for 16 years.
And you would think that would be the thing that stops them from doing it because you're talking about you got a fresh body. The guy that they're reanimating is a smart doctor who should have compassion and all the other things, should have everything that they're looking for. This isn't an Abby normal brain. This is what they want. And when they reanimate him, he becomes a killer.
Yeah.
And yet West continues to try and break the code. So we get the third story. Is that the one where they finally become doctors and they go to a different town
Canada. They go to Canada. Or
and they
no, is
get,
that the one with the fighter?
yeah, I don't, yeah, I think that's because they're the doctor and they get their own place and it's up against the, the graveyard.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that is the one I think they do get the fighter because he dies in a legal boxing match, and they run to get him because his brand just dead,
Just dead, fresh.
and he doesn't revive, and they bury him, and I think is that the same one where the kid it goes missing,
Yeah,
and then the mother dies because she has a weak heart, she gets hysterical, and she dies of a heart attack. And then they start actually attacking West. The father attacks West and accuses him of not saving his wife, and so it's all
forgets about the
downhill.
kid who's missing.
And the whole time they never find the kid. And that night there's banging at the door. West wakes up the narrator. They go downstairs, open the door. There's the boxer covered in ground and moss, and in his mouth is the arm of the child that's missing. And
Yeah.
so West immediately kills him, shoots all 6 shots of his revolver into him.
Yeah, and that was the title of that one, The Night of Six Shots or something like
Yeah.
that.
Then we get the next one, I think, is I feel like we're missing one, but isn't the next one World War One?
Yep, where they go to Canada,
Yeah.
which is kind of odd to me how, I mean, that was way back in the 20s, and it could have been even earlier where the story took place, but they go and they join the Canadian Army. West goes first, and then the narrator follows.
Well, he was a popular surgeon, and so they would need that kind of thing when they get into war. And that's the whole reason West wanted to do it was so that he had more access to body parts.
Yep,
And that's when he stops focusing on reanimating entire bodies and starts messing around with parts.
parts. Yep,
And then another medic dies and is almost decapitated. He finishes decapitating the guy. He's got the dude's head in the goo. They inject the body's moving around, and the head starts screaming. Oh, you know what? I do know the story we missed before this one, but we'll finish this and I'll backtrack. So then we've got so now we know that he can animate body parts, that it's not just specifically to the dead body or whatever. But then a bomb hits the tent or whatever and annihilates everything but the narrator and West. And so they think everybody's dead.
yep.
And then they finish their tour and then they go home. Previously, before they go to join the army thing, do you remember the story where the narrator's on vacation and he comes back from vacation, and there's a dead body in the basement that's been
Oh,
preserved because he figured out a new way to preserve like a preserve
yes.
a body, to keep it fresh
Yes.
so that when a guy shows up, they can inject it again. And they inject it, and the body's, moving and mumbling and gibberish. And the narrator's asking him questions. And at the end, right before they put the body back down, because nothing seems to be working, the body announces that West killed him. And so then we
Yes.
learned that West told this story about how this guy had a heart attack and that he tried to save him and he died. So then he injects him and saves him so that they can do the experiments. But we find out that West injected him with something to cause the heart attack, to kill him. And now the narrator understands that it's not just about reanimating a dead body, but now that West has become so over the top with it that he's willing to kill somebody to get the freshest body to have the thing work. And so now for some reason, now the narrator's scared of him.
Nervous. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a minute, dude. You've been messing with dead bodies with this dude for a long time. You should have been nervous from the first story.
Right.
But and what's funny is I'm reading all these, you're getting it through the perspective of the narrator. So you're not really getting a lot of West.
Yeah.
But because the character of West is so good in the movie Reanimator, the whole time I'm reading it, I'm picturing that intensity that was in the movie. And
Yeah.
so it really works so much better when you have the movie kind of rolling in the background, just influencing the storytelling. Because I really did enjoy all of these stories. So then we got 5 stories out of the way. We're at the last story, and this is where we kind of learn that West is missing. He's gone, and nobody knows where he's at, and the narrator is under suspicion for doing something that nobody can prove, and the narrator can't really explain to normal folk. But since he's telling us the story, we learned that all of these reanimated characters from the first 5 stories seem to have been gathered together. And I assume that it was the
Led by the
medic,
medic. Yeah.
the guy with the box, his head in a box, and he's got a wax head, and he seems to be the leader. And then they gathered everybody, and then they went to the insane asylum because they want that guy. And then they the dean that's been reanimated, the cannibal killer, and they won't release him, so they all attack. And all of that plays in my mind like the hospital from Reanimator, when they all start moving around and doing stuff. And so it's just such a fun story, the way that they end it. And so we find out that Herbert is attacked and disemboweled by for lack of a better word, they're all zombies, which is
Yeah.
another thing that I think is pretty fascinating to think of, that because I don't know how prevalent zombie horror would have been in the 20s.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then,
Well,
yeah, on top of that, we're talking the science fiction element to it, and it's really clever to have it where you have smart zombies and mindless zombies, and they all seem to have that need, that hunger that needs to be, you know, sated, and so we get this wide range of different kinds of zombies too within the stories. But it ends with them killing West, disemboweling him, and I think they cut his head off, and then they leave. And that's the one thing I need to go back and reread because I guess I didn't gather it. But when the cops come, there's no evidence that the zombies broke through the wall. But that's how the
yeah.
narrator tells us the story.
Yeah, it was kind of
So,
like magic that like the wall was perfectly fine.
right. And so in my head, I was like, well, did he fix it himself just to be done with the whole thing? Or because then if he leaves the wall broken down, they have to kind of explain, that how it was broken down. But I don't understand why you wouldn't just say humans knocked it down.
Yeah.
That's the one thing. But at this point, are we dealing with an unreliable narrator that might be mad himself after
Yeah.
dealing with all the stuff that West had done
I
to
mean,
him and
and
stuff?
all the yeah, like all the trauma because throughout all the stories, this poor narrator's
Yeah.
like, oh, you
Yeah,
know,
that's so funny too how they do that to that poor guy because he's the right hand man. He's kind of his assistant, but in a way they're partners. But you can tell that West doesn't respect this guy or care
no,
really much about anything other than the fact that this guy helps him dig up bodies and bury bodies and do all that
Yeah,
other
and
fun
it's like
stuff.
he just keeps following him around because he'll say in the recap, like, I don't really like this, but I
I,
went and I joined the army with him, and we
yeah, I
opened a
know, right?
practice together, and
It's so
we
funny.
we
It's
lived
like
together.
it almost makes you think that maybe he was hopeful that West would give up on the whole reanimation thing. And then that's why it's so horrific to him when he discovers that he's got to the point where he will kill somebody to get the fresh body. So maybe that would have been the turning point, but it wasn't because that's when he follows him to the in the army and stuff. But
Yeah, and the ironic thing is he was successful because the
yeah,
medic was clear and concise and was able to lead a troop of zombies, I'll just call them. He just didn't have a head,
yeah,
you know?
which is
So,
even that much more fantastical and amazing is that he's carrying his head around because I mean the
yep,
head's still talking, which is one of the funniest parts of the movie when the other doctor's head's kind of doing its own thing and the body's kind of wandering around and stuff. It does make for a memorable scene with the lady Barbara was it Compton who plays the girlfriend of the assistant. And that's so funny because in that it's I mean we're following the West and we're not really being shown through the eyes of the narrator, but that would be the blonde guy from Reanimator. And so
yeah,
it's I enjoyed it this time. I don't know. I've read it before and I was, it was fine. Nothing crazy, but this time I really did enjoy it.
yeah, yeah. I had to look into it because, like you said at the beginning of each story, it like recaps, and I'm like, this is kind of annoying a little bit. But
Oh
then I
yeah.
realized when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, it was a serial, so that explains it because somebody may not have read the first one or the second one or the four,
And of course they all together it's definitely a better story. But
Yeah,
each part I could see you could read each part and be okay with it.
yep,
I would assume that your curiosity would be piqued and make you want to read the other ones. But this isn't like today when you could just jump on the internet and find the other parts. Who knows how difficult this original publication was to get, because it's not even like I said, it was like an amateur publication put out by a friend. It wasn't
yeah.
really
And how
something.
often was it put out? Like once a
So,
month, every quarter? Like,
yeah. And I think that's funny though that he's basically like, well, I got paid $5 a story, so I had, I needed to put it out. So,
yeah,
um, I
yeah,
do. I mean, for anything, it gave us Reanimator, the movie, great movie. But
yeah.
I did enjoy this one.
Yeah, and we had talked about this before we started recording, but I had seen Reanimator once a long, long time ago. I know, the movie is familiar to me. Um, I didn't realize it was based off of H.P. Lovecraft because, again, I have not been really familiar with Lovecraft.
Right.
Um, so
It wasn't in my wheelhouse as a youngin, and I don't know why, but it just wasn't one that I ever gravitated towards. And I think it might have been like when we discussed with Frankenstein. I don't remember myself being a big fan of Frankenstein either. So I probably just assumed it was a Frankenstein thing and just kind of avoided it. But I've seen it recently, and I'm like, this movie's it's very good.
yeah. So what we have all learned from Herbert West Reanimator is if at first you don't succeed to animate a dead body, stop.
Yeah, that's what exactly we should stop. Or you know what? Walk away. Let your friend continue his experiments, but you need to walk away.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
narrator should have been a one-part narration and
Yeah.
then five tales from Herbert's point of view.
I felt so bad for that guy. I'm like, you just don't want any part of this, but you just keep going.
Yeah,
And then we have the Call of Cthulhu. Um,
which
I,
is important, but it's not the best. It's almost I read a little thing that somebody called it a series of essays. And I thought, well, that
mhm,
does describe it very well. It
yeah,
does feel like that. Each story felt like you were just getting information dumped,
yeah,
which is important because this has a lot of information if you were following the mythos of the old gods and Cthulhu and stuff. So it had a lot of interesting information in it, and I enjoyed hearing everything and seeing all the stuff and kind of getting a an idea of what was going on with that character. and with some of the ideas that he was putting in place for his overall mythos, but I don't know if it was a captivating read.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it. I understood it, which I was really kind of nervous about. Um, and so it was interesting to me the format of it, how it's somebody like you said, essays, but isn't it the guy's great uncle dies and
Yeah,
he
and he gets
goes
like
to
a
his
diary or
he
something.
gets a diary and he's reading it and he ends up like, he had gone to like different countries and with all these same kind of I'll call them totems. The
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause I would say
the
they explain it to us how he looks through words, and then they explain us how he looks through dreams when the guy starts having the freaky dreams.
yeah.
And then they start carving statues of Cthulhu.
Yeah,
So we
and
get
I
an idea of what he's supposed to be like and all those bits and pieces, kind of.
yeah, because and it's funny because that it takes it not just one area thing because there was and it with different religions. So like the voodoo out in Louisiana, the they had, part of a Cthulhu cult, I guess
Yeah.
you'd call them, the cult of Cthulhu. Um, and then it was in another country, a European country, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was really interesting because I always, I'm like, wow, he's like incorporating different cultures into this mythos.
Yeah, and then he does kind of tell us that the city that the creature's trapped on under the water, he makes it feel like that's Atlantis,
Yep.
and that and the reason why he can't control everybody with his thoughts and stuff is because the water is dampening his reach, and that what is it, the people that are in tune with Cthulhu, he can influence them, but most people aren't in tune with them, and that's why
Yeah.
they don't know who that he's there or that he's trying to influence them. So that's kind of an interesting, way of describing what's going on, and that Cthulhu's, while he's still gigantic and he's this monster thing, that he's also really almost a herald of the dark, the old
Yeah.
gods, and that he's going to be the thing that reawakens the gateway or the entry of the old gods back into once the city rises, and then he can take over everybody and all that
hmm
stuff. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
liked how all the different events were connected.
mhm.
The artist with his fever and the dreams, and then in Australia, there was something happening on the ocean with the boats. Um, they attacked, and then it only ended up being like two people left on the boat.
Yeah,
Um, so it was really interesting to see how these essays or these journal entries like connected all these different events that were happened across the world.
yeah, it was a clever way to get the information out, but there were times where I kind of felt like this is just an info dump,
Yeah,
which is, when you're dealing with something as large as this and only able to tell the stories in short stories, because I mean that's all he's doing. He's just sending everything to, what is it, Weird Tales or whatever the hot science fiction slash fantasy magazines at the time were. And that's the other thing. It's always so crazy when you think about. Yeah, I know a lot. So there are people that don't think he can write. There are people that don't like, the way he tells stories and stuff. But we're not talking about some idiot that could just get online and just publish his stuff. He was actually purchased by reputable magazines and storytellers and stuff and these ideas. So you can kind of know that he's got something going on.
yeah, yeah, because
Although
it was a process.
some of it might be that he's friends with them, but
Yeah,
you also, when you read about him, you kind of tell he doesn't really have a lot of friends, or that or most of them may be more like acquaintances just because
yeah,
of the way he is.
yeah. I was going to say writing this type of stuff back in the 20s, the early 1900s, because he started in 1908 was when The Alchemist was published. Um, who would want to be friends with someone who
Well,
wrote
that's the funny,
this
because
stuff?
he's really good friends with a lot of the other writers that would do this, but they're all scattered across the country. So there's all these letters written back and forth between them as they discuss their ideas and what they're doing and stuff. And it's like, man, I'm sure there's probably people that have published some of those, but that would be pretty fun to go through, is just kind of get an idea of what they're thinking as
Yeah,
they're
and
writing to contemporaries.
could you imagine, like, if we want to brainstorm, hey, you want to do a Zoom tomorrow and we talk about it and we do it, but to brainstorm with other people across the country back then, you'd have to write it out in a letter
Yeah.
and mail it, and it could take like what, 2 weeks maybe to get there, and then the person has to read it and write you a response and mail it back. So how long did it like take him to write a
And we're not
short
even
story?
talking like how we communicate. I mean, those letters are probably pages long,
Hmm.
super elaborate,
Yeah,
written in a style that's very, um, elegant and
formal.
yeah,
Yeah,
very formal. And
yeah,
so, yeah, no, I don't know. You're right. It would probably take months to get anything done if you were actually brainstorming with somebody.
yeah,
But I know that a lot of them would write each other just to congratulate or to say, "Oh, I really like this story. What blah blah. How'd you get to this point?" And a lot of that back and forth, I think. So, it's crazy to think of how it was done back then when you compare to how we can do it today if we wanted to, and the way a lot of
yeah,
people do. It's very it almost feels underground the way we do it. Um, even though it's more mainstream, I guess, in a way.
yeah. Yeah, it was a whole,
It gave us Cthulhu. It adds to the mythos, so of course it's important. Out of the four we did, this would probably be my least favorite.
yeah,
But just because of the way it is. But at the same time, I did enjoy it. So uh, it's not like when I say, it's not like it's bad. It's just not. I did enjoy the other ones a little more.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
But it
Um,
did awaken a desire to read more, where I'd kind of been done with Lovecraft for a while because the last time I think I tried to read some stuff, I just wasn't in the mood or something because it just did not connect. But this time I find myself not only connecting with the stories and enjoying the stories, but I'm already in my head moving forward on stories that I know that are Lovecraftian in nature that I've been working on, and all of a sudden I find that they're those stories that I want to push to the front of the line and get those done. When before they might have been farther back, when I was trying to work on other things that I
yeah,
want to get done. So I'm like, I'm ready to dive back into some of these things I've had on the back burner, um, just because of reading these stories and having it reawoken and kind of maybe figuring out a few of the things that might have been holding me up on it. So it's totally worth reading it just for that. But I really did enjoy it. I'm glad we picked that. I'm glad you picked that one for
yeah,
the holiday, because Lord knows what I would have found. So
yeah,
it wouldn't have been anything as near as good as doing a Lovecraft
yeah. And that
episode.
just simply, I picked it simply because I Googled um, vintage Christmas horror, and that was one of the things that came up. And it was something that was easily accessible because I had told you before I had found some from like the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, but they were like out of print, so you'd have to pay like $35 for a copy of the book, and um,
Yeah,
by
and
an author I had never heard of before. So
yeah, there's just not a ton that I can think of the old school stuff off the top of my head. I couldn't even think. I mean, I guess technically I can think of one Stephen King story we could have done, but that's counterintuitive to what we normally do when it comes to Stephen King. So,
yeah,
um, but yeah, no, this was great. The festival, it does work. I mean, it. I'm looking at the notes now because they were blocked when we were doing the share screen, but it starts with, it was the Yuletide that men called Christmas, though they knew in their hearts it was older than Bethlehem and Babylon,
yeah,
older than Memphis and mankind, which then I think ties into the question you were talking about how they were talking about not being human. And maybe that's what the festival was really about, was transcending from being human
human
to
to
being
being
part of
more.
whatever this
Yeah,
thing is.
yeah. And I found um, the copies that I read. I found them on Amazon on Kindle. I think I paid 99 cents for one of them, and I can't remember, but one of them I paid 29 cents for, and two of them I paid 58 cents for.
Yeah, they're not expensive. I actually have this one that has the festival in it and a whole bunch of other stories. And then I have a really cool
Ooh,
hardcover. I wish I had the slip cover. It's really sharp, but it has um 550 pages, and it also had, I mean, it's just full of stories, and it had all the stories that we were talking about today.
yeah.
So I was able to jump in and share that too. My bookmark is from Kim.
Ooh, nice.
Yep, pretty cool. Not really 100, I don't think. If it was, I probably would have spent it by now, but it has a Hulk on it. But yeah, no, Kim gave that to me the last time I saw her.
Nice.
And so, yeah, no, so it's really cool. That's the cool thing about Lovecraft. You can find some, and I could go into the other room and I could grab four other paperbacks I have of Lovecraft stuff. And that's probably part of it, being public domain. People can do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
also,
because two of the Kindle copies I had were from like India Press or something like that.
yeah, so I think people just grab it and do it. But when you get
Yeah.
one of these really cool collections, I got this in a book of horror. They do the box exchange.
Hmm. Yeah.
The person that I exchanged with a couple years ago, they sent me this as part of one of
Oh
the
wow.
whole box thing. So yeah, it's really
Nice.
cool. And it's just done in a nice way. You can really dive into it. Lovecraft kind of feels like you almost want to have a book in your hands. Although I did enjoy listening to the audio today when I was doing yard work and stuff. So I finished
Yeah.
the call today, went over it again because even though I like the audiobooks, I don't always register anything. So you want to hear it two or three times when you're doing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and the YouTube videos, because they're short stories, they weren't that long either.
Yeah.
So so it's great. But yeah, my advice is don't be afraid of Lovecraft if you think it's too sophisticated, I'll say, for your brain. No, you give it a shot. And
Yeah,
they're
I'll be
bite
honest.
size, so you don't have to buy a 500 and something page volume of Lovecraft stories. You
Oh
can
yeah,
pick
for
up
sure.
the Call of Cthulhu. I think I paid 29 cents for a Kindle version on
Or,
Amazon.
go to a used bookstore, you're gonna
Used,
find 10 or 15 copies of something.
yep,
It doesn't have everything. Some of them are very specific on what they're focused on when they're doing those collections, but you'll get a good taste. And there's always something really cool in those collections too. And the covers usually are really, really cool.
yeah,
This one is super lame, but this is because this is one of those like cheap penguin ones or whatever.
yeah.
I mean, that's just terrible.
I can't even tell what it is.
It looks like it's somebody in a boat,
Oh,
right? That's a
okay,
boat.
yeah,
These people are in a boat, and then these are the ladies. And I'm sure this is one of the stories that I should know, but I don't. So, oh, that might be Dagon, but we'll have to figure it out. I guess we can when we
yeah,
read some more stories and stuff. Actually, I think people would find Poe more um, daunting than Lovecraft.
yeah,
When you read Poe, that's very flowery, and I could see how that would be off-putting to a reader, today's reader.
yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah,
I'm
very,
excited for us to jump into those two.
yeah, I'm excited to read more Lovecraft. I've been missing out my whole life
Yep.
on Lovecraft.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've read some of it, but I don't think I've appreciated it as much as I did this last time. So it's always good to revisit stuff. You may not like it, whenever you give it a shot, go back, try some other stuff, try it again. New experiences, more experience reading, that kind of stuff. Maybe it'll lead you back to some of these older things. And it's part of the reason we're doing this, right? Is that we discover older writers and see the people that have paved the way for us to get to where we are now. So I'm glad we
Yep,
went and revisited this one.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's our holiday episode. We kind of didn't really have a Christmassy story, but as Christmassy as we could find. Get you some Lovecraft for your stocking, and don't go mad with the Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
Because isn't that the whole thing? You're going to go mad.
Yeah, just putting you in, and then that right there is straight out of the Bible. I mean, that's just taking that if you were to see God's true face, or see the angels in their true form or whatever, it's supposed to be able to drive men crazy and stuff. So I mean, I think that's what he's saying there. He's just a different way of looking at religion or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I have read some while we're on Cosmic Horror. I don't have the covers, but two I can recommend if somebody's looking for Cosmic Horror. Um, Hammers on Bone by Cassandra Khaw, Khaw, and Where the Gods Sleep by Mike Duke.
Yeah, as I said, Mike Duke's the guy you got to read if you like cosmic horror.
Yeah, Mike Duke was the first Cosmic Horror I ever read, Where the Gods Sleep, and he actually recommended Cassandra Khaw to me. So then I picked up her book, Hammers on Bone, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think I mean technically Chris Miller's, some of his stuff dips their toe into cosmic.
Hmm. Yeah,
Dust and the damned the damned ones. I think
The
the damned
Damned
ones.
Place
Damn, one
is
of
the
those.
first one, and The Damned Ones is
One of
the
those is very cosmic-y, and the other
yeah,
one I think is a mixture of a couple other things. But yeah, Chris Miller's got some stuff too.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, go read some Lovecraft.
Yep. All right. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Take it easy.